West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est long, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Joining us now is Washington Post reporter Carol Leonnig. She is the author of the new book, Zero Fail, The Rise and Fall of the Secret Service. Ms. Leonnig, congratulations on this new book. Thank you so much for being here tonight on the eve of your pub date. I really appreciate you making the time.
Thanks for hitting all the really important points of the book, Rachel. You know, you supported this reporting early on. You focused on it way back in 2014. And I'm glad to be here to share everything else I've learned since then.
Well, thank you for saying that. First of all, I'm going to hold up the book so people can key on what it looks like, too, because you should buy it. This is one of those books that will go down as sort of the seminal work, the determinative work in this field. But I have to say, Carol, that more than any individual anecdote or any individual scare that I read about in the book, all of which have stuck with me, more than that, I am struck by a gnawing fear that this agency, for all sorts of interesting and explicable reasons, isn't that good at what they do, that they're kind of a hot mess. And it makes me fearful for the current administration. I have to ask if that's where you have also landed overall in taking this deep look at this agency.
Yes, I fear that the compulsion to write this book was because, you know, I landed in this beat by accident. I was covering what was then the most humiliating scandal in the Secret Service's history. You know, the hooker gate of Cartagena, agents having prostitutes in their room, getting smashed, you know, while they're supposed to be securing the city for President Obama's arrival. But what I found in talking to these agents and meeting more of them was that there was something much more horrifying underneath that or behind that curtain, and that was they really feared that the president would be shot and killed on their watch. They knew they were being run ragged. They knew their tools were outdated, and they couldn't deliver on what they knew was a zero-fail mission. They can't lose one time, and yet they're gasping to try to keep up.
You report that on that last point that I was discussing, that the Biden administration went so far as to ask for the entire presidential detail to be switched out, essentially, between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, in part because of the worries that at least some elements of the Secret Service may have been corrupted, may have been brought over to one political side during the Trump administration. What can you tell us about that request and how that was ultimately resolved?
There were transition advisors who were having informal conversations with people they knew inside the Secret Service, people they knew from previous times agents who protected Biden when he was vice president. And what they were hearing was making their skin crawl. There were people who were supervisors on the detail who had MAGA hats in their offices. There were agents on the protective detail who were all wearing red ties on the day of the election in solidarity with President Trump. And as you've shared from my book, there were social media postings in which, again, members of the Presidential Protection Division were championing and cheering the attack on the Capitol, questioning whether or not President Biden, President-elect Biden at that point, was legitimately elected. You know, if the most elite protection agency in the world is questioning whether or not Biden is president, there's a reason to be concerned, at least on the part of the transition advisors, about whether he is safe in their arms. At the end of the day, the Secret Service did change many of the supervisors of that detail, many of them, to install people that Joe Biden knew from previous eras when he was vice president, so that he would have some comfort of the familiar, comfort of people that had protected him in the past and protected Jill Biden in the past.
What was the ultimate disposition of the Secret Service official agent who was moved into the Trump White House to take a political role and then moved right back into the Secret Service as if he could still then play some sort of nonpartisan technocratic role? I had known something about that story. I had not known that he had moved back to the Secret Service as an assistant director.
He's an assistant director for training. He's very close to the director, the current director, Jim Murray. At the president's request, at President Trump's request, he liked his detail leader so much, Tony Ornato, that he asked for him to be temporarily assigned, almost like on a detail, as the deputy White House chief of staff. In that role, the deputy chief of staff and former Secret Service leader was key in clearing the Lafayette Park outside the White House for the June 1 march that the president had to show how tough he was and that he was a law and order president prevailing over the protesters of George Floyd's murder. That same deputy White House chief of staff was critical in planning the president's rallies as COVID spiked. And that ultimately led to 300 Secret Service officers and agents that summer either contracting COVID or being exposed to COVID so that they had to quarantine away from their coworkers. It was a sort of an amazing thing that, and it infuriated so many Secret Service alumni, because this is an agency that prides itself on objectivity, political independence. As they say in the agency, you know, the people elect them, we just protect them. But in this instance, you had a Secret Service leader working as a political entity and arm of President Trump.
Yeah, and it's one thing to think about somebody ex-Secret Service then taking on a political role. It's a whole other thing if that person then finishes that and goes back to the Secret Service. That's the part of it that just seems impossible and intolerable. Carol Leonnig, Washington Post reporter, 3-time Pulitzer Prize winner, the author of Zero Fail, The Rise and Fall of the Secret Service, which comes out tomorrow. Carol, thank you for this public service.
It is Tuesday, the 18th of May of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, a small scant dash. A mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika made all the difference in the world, all through history. Indeed. Well, we're not talking the spice trade anymore when we're talking about how corrupt the Secret Service is. Some might argue that political inclinations have always existed within the Secret Service. But they would always say, but we're professionals. We don't like it. We don't let it intrude upon our work. And so what's their excuse now is what I want to know. Yeah, pretty scary. I think you might say that White House down. What's going to happen then? Well, it happened. Except, when the microscopic Chinese stormed the White House, just like in White House Down, there were millions of microscopic Chinese, but they were embodied within what we could see in moviedom. Follow me here now. I'm going to make a point. It turns out that the Secret Service just opened up the doors and let them in. Come on in. And they weren't microscopic Chinese. They were, well, Cyrillic coded entities, shall we say. All right, enough of that. But, when I say that, I mean that line of thought, because I would say rather than comedy, the idea that the Secret Service is so corrupt, as we are hearing, that Joe needs to completely change out the security detail and bring back some relics from his past because he only trusts them. Ouch. So the Russian infiltration of our government. Now, when I say that, no, I don't mean actual. We don't need to actually have a Rusky. Maybe I should say a Vladist. I got to figure out one type of nomenclature to denote, Vlad and his comic book, two-dimensional description. Anyway, we don't need to have an actual, Russian agent within various apparatus of our government and infrastructure. But useful idiots will be very useful. And so you may have some useful idiots within the Secret Service, not actually in the employ of Vlad, i.e. Russia. That's the other thing. This colonial pipeline thing, and we have actually a story later on at the chef's table about another cyber attack ransomware happening in the world. These malign actors are sometimes called criminals independent of nation states, but you have to understand, and we already do, I'm just preaching to the choir here, and I apologize, but I have to make the point, is that these malign actors, common criminals, so to speak, are in the employ of the Russian government when they're Russian. Nobody does anything without Vlad's okay. Do you know how a mob government works? Just look at The Godfather and give you some indication. And then when you're dealing with the Russian mob, their code of honor is a little bit different. Let's just put it that way. Women and children sometimes conveniently find themselves caught up in the turmoil that, I don't know, even the Sicilians wouldn't endeavor in. Oh, I know, they sometimes would. Anyway, we have, I think, a Nazi rat problem all through government, White House down. And when I say Nazis, you know what I mean, too. Boy, is this all for private enterprise? It would be nice if it was only for that. So, yeah, this whole thing about the Secret Service is rather frightening. I didn't think that it would actually... we've known about it for a considerable time. When Rachel reminded us of the... or maybe it might have been Carol Lanning. Reminded us of the frat boy party down in Latin America where the Secret Service were with prostitutes in the rooms, and I guess some guy didn't want to pay. I want my money back. And the prostitute took him to court or had the police arrest him. But, they're there for the president's detail. Yikes. Wow. Did they think, well, we got a black president now, we don't have to do anything? Let's just party? What a bunch of BS. Yeah, that's being professional. Uh-huh. So, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think we need to purge quite a bit from the employ of our government right now. I think there needs to be a massive vetting process. I'm sorry, you're going to have to reapply and give us your resume. Might be a good way to start another jobs program, don't you think? And an educational program, because you need to get people educated to be able to make a functioning government function. I'm a romantic. It's not going to happen. But we do have a show for the rest of the day here, or the rest of the day, at least for this hour. Where am I? Yeah, I'm winging it. But we do have a little bit of order here, a little bit of curation. And yes, so at the top, the corruption at the Secret Service has made the security of Joe a concern, a grave concern. And boy, like I said, there might have to be another vetting process. At least Joe has a detail that he trusts. Let's just hope that they're competent. I don't know if he pulled them off the shelves. When I said relics from his past, that was when he was VP. But he also had friends, as a senator. He had a certain amount of Secret Service detail. And when he had run for office various times, that was our office of the president. Well, on the rest of the menu here today, 30 House Republicans, you would expect, have introduced legislation that would prevent the federal government from fighting racism, sexism, and gender discrimination, because when you're doing Vlad's work, you got to do Vlad's work. The GOP is upset that Space Force demoted an extremist who bashed its anti-racism training. Especially when you have 30 House Republicans introducing, a bigot bill. And a Minneapolis suburb has approved a roadmap for police reform. Got to have some good news in there. Let's hope that they're able to fulfill that roadmap. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Russian cybercriminals hit 4 Asian subsidiaries of the Paris-based insurance company AXA with a ransomware attack, and the repercussions have actually reverberated around the world once again. And Mexico's president apologized for the 1911 massacre of over 300 Chinese people. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. I apologize for that rambling man soliloquy there. I guess that's just indicative that I need more sleep and more highly caffeinated coffee. Well, I've got some coffee. Scrambled and got it. And here we are. So if you would go to the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. That's because you do that, and thank you, Kelly, for doing that, and so much more. If you would then look across the page, to the left of the page, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, there is the Patreon link. If you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, your recurring patronage helps us pay our bills so that then we can fly under the radar. Continue this resistance broadcasting that we have been broadcasting for 10 continuous years of 24/7, 365 continuous resistance broadcasting, as the founders originally intended, even before Scalia. Isn't that weird? Anyway, all kidding aside, if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink and send those funds to us once a month, we are able to stretch those dollars, pay said bills, fly under said radar, and fulfill our civic duty. And thank you. And I want to also once again give those who have increased their donations recently, give a big shout out to you and say thank you. Man, costs keep going up even during a pandemic, and surprisingly, machinery wears out. So we're phasing in various parts of the workhorses here, and we had a bit of a problem towards the end of the year, but we also had an eye turned towards, well, you know, you got this bit of equipment going out to pasture, so to speak. They're still being used, just not workhorses. And then you've got some more that are, you know, you might have to phase it out a little bit, let them not work as hard, and they all have to have software. What is up with that? Anyway, thank you for increasing those monthly patronages. It has come at a fortuitous time. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and a whole lot more like voiceovers and graphics for the webpage. In fact, the webpage. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary. It will always be a diary to me on Daily Co's. Thanks, Co's. About 10 minutes before showtime. Get that linked up on Twitter and other social media platforms, even that Zuckerberg one. How dare he? And if you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, YouTube, iHeart, iTunes, and really wherever podcasts can be found. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, because we also have a chef's table. Oh, yeah. Comes out of the American Independent by the great Oliver Willis, and you would expect Republicans to do what they do. 30 of them on Friday introduced legislation that would prevent the federal government from supporting efforts to fight racism, sexism, and gender discrimination. The bill was introduced by Representative Burgess Owens, a repug from Utah. I don't know. He's, some people might say, no, I'm afraid to say it. But he does have 29 co-sponsors, including Representatives Madison Cawthorn. Now, you know he's a little bigot, Nazi. Lauren Boebert, well, that's, you know about her. Brian Mast. Yeah, what's up with that guy's hair? It's always like wet and dripping and stuff. Do they have that much humidity there in Florida where Mast comes from? Chip Roy. Oh, my God, that guy from Texas. And Ronnie Jackson. Dr. Ronnie, handing out the speed. Here, want some speed? Well, Burgess Owens is a black Republican from Utah. Okay. And he's introduced a bill with these co-sponsors. Well, H.R. 3235, if passed, would reinstate an executive order issued by Trump that prevented the federal government from providing programs and funding for those programs that included material on combating racism and gender stereotypes in the workplace. And we have a follow-up story on that coming right after this one. Trump's order, issued on September 27th of 2020, prevented federal contractors from conducting trainings for their employees that inculcate what the order called divisive concepts, including that the United States is fundamentally racist or sexist, and that meritocracy or traits such as a hard work ethic are racist or sexist, or were created by a particular race to oppress another race. President Joe Biden rescinded the order on January 20th, his first day in office. The bill, introduced by Owens, claims that advancing equity is based on critical race theory, about which it says, critical race theory, according to the Heritage Foundation, visiting fellow Chris Rupo, is the idea that the United States is a fundamentally racist country. Critical race theory is, at its core, un-American, discriminatory, and based on Marxist ideology. You know what's weird? Is that they used to say that desegregation was a Marxist theory. This is the oldest damn argument in the world, Burgess. How stupid do you think we are? Well, pretty darn stupid, because 73 million of them voted for a Nazi. I got to tell you, it's getting to the point that anybody who has a criticism about critical race theory, what they've never read, by the way, it's a legal theory. The 1619 Project is journalism, and they don't want that taught either. Because then people would apparently be indoctrinated into believing that slavery was part of America, and we can't let people know that. The slaves love their slave owners. Yeah, well, it's not 30 Shades of Gray or whatever it is. 50 Shades of Gray? Well, this one's 30 Shades of Gray. The legislation is unlikely to get a full vote or pass, while Democrats have a majority in the House, Mr. Midterm coming up. In a separate legislative proposal, House Republicans on the 12th of May introduced legislation opposing anti-racist diversity training for federal, civil, and military employees, describing such training as racist and evidence of critical race theory. Anybody, once again, who criticizes critical race theory is a bigot by definition. Echoing Trump, Republicans have attacked initiatives like the New York Times 1619 Project, aimed at expanding the history of America's founding and its growth, and to include the experiences and contributions of enslaved Americans. And you know, the Heritage Foundation cannot have that. Now, Oliver Willis sums up here that Republicans who have attacked efforts to address discrimination on the basis of race, ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation continue to support figures like Trump, who repeatedly and publicly embraced and still embraces bigoted ideas and rhetoric. Josh Israel of the American Independent brings us somewhat of a follow-up from the preceding story here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. U.S. Space Force Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Lohmeyer was relieved of command of a squadron last week following comments in the publication of his book attacking anti-racism efforts as Marxism. Who wrote this? The Heritage Foundation? Heritage Action? I wonder. It's like what the girl said, and I say she's a girl because she's under 40, okay? At this point, if they're under 50. What the gal said at the Heritage Action, where they were gloating about writing this model legislation like ALEC, where they even had proxies advance their efforts. Well, it sounds like Lohmeyer might be one of those because he's got the Marxism label down too. Of course, it is one of the oldest dodges in the world by racists. Congressional Republicans are furious that he's gone. It's outrageous, tweeted Colorado Representative Ken Buck. Troubling, said Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Where was he, in Cancun? This is outrageous, opined Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. So-called critical race theory has no place in our military or our country, period. Well, you'd expect her to say that because she's a Nazi, too. And then you got, somebody by the name of Representative Vicky Hartzler of Missouri. She didn't like it. Of course, Madison Cawthorn. He is a patriot, should not have been removed from his post. Well, He's a little brown shirt Nazi. Had to go see the Eagle's Nest. That was part of his bucket list. Yeah. According to a Space Force statement provided to the Washington Examiner on Saturday, Lohmeyer was removed due to loss of trust and confidence in his ability to lead after he made comments on a recent podcast criticizing Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin's agenda of inclusion and diversity. The decision was based on public comments made by Lieutenant Colonel Lohmeyer in a recent podcast. Lieutenant General Stephen Whiting, head of Space Operations Command, has initiated a command-directed investigation on whether these comments constituted prohibited partisan political activity, the statement said. The diversity, inclusion, and equity industry and the trainings we are receiving in the military is rooted in critical race theory, which is rooted in Marxism, Lohmeyer charged. He was promoting his self-published book. Oh, you mean a vanity press? Irresistible Revolution, Marxism's goal of conquest and the unmaking of the American military. Hey, purge all the Nazis from the military and law enforcement. Sorry, Nazi, you don't like it? Most Nazis don't. Austin is working to address far-right extremism in the U.S. Armed Forces following the January 6th riot by supporters of Donald Trump. Some of the people involved in this insurrection had ties to the military as veterans and current enlisted military personnel. Republicans have attacked the military's diversity training, proposing to bar it to restrict the spread of critical race theory. You know what? This is their boogeyman. Now, while Republican lawmakers are outraged about the removal of Lohmeyer, they were notably silent in February of 2020 when Trump ousted Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, a decorated Army officer, and his twin brother Yevgeny from their positions working for the National Security Council in retaliation for Alexander's truthful testimony during Trump's first impeachment trial. At the time, Matt Gaetz defended the move, saying Vindman had shown poor judgment. Staff at the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Elected officials in a Minneapolis suburb where a police officer fatally shot Dante Wright during a traffic stop in April approved a resolution that puts the city on track to major changes to its policing practices. The Brooklyn Center City Council voted 4-1 on Saturday in favor of a resolution that would create new divisions of unarmed civilian employees to handle non-moving traffic violations and respond, I would say more importantly, to mental health crises. It also limits situations in which officers can make arrests and requires more de-escalation efforts by police before using deadly force. In addition, a new Department of Community Safety and Violence Prevention would be formed to oversee efforts on community health and public safety, led by a director with public health expertise. The city attorney and the mayor have said that adopting the resolution commits the city to change, though it is not a final action because, there's always going to be someone that really wants the police to be as violent as they can be. They want concierges to come and take care of all those people they don't like. The resolution will establish a new North Star for our community, one that will keep all of us safe, said Brooklyn Center Mayor Mike Elliott. It says that we, as your elected leaders, are committing ourselves and that you can hold us accountable for achieving those goals. Elliott introduced the resolution last week, less than a month after then Brooklyn Center officer Kim Potter, who is white, fatally shot Wright, a 20-year-old black motorist. The city's police chief, who has since stepped down, has said he believed Potter meant to use her taser on Wright during the April 11 stop instead of her handgun. Body camera video shows her shouting "taser" multiple times before firing, and the shooting ignited days of unrest. She never had her taser out. The body cam footage shows her holding her service weapon in front of her the whole time. Council members Marquita Butler, April Graves, and Dan Ryan joined Elliott in voting for the resolution. Council member Chris Lawrence Anderson voted against it, saying that the council had not taken enough time to weigh the proposal. The 3-hour meeting, including testimony from Wright's family as well as the family of Kobe Dimmock Heisler, who was also killed by Brooklyn Center police. Potter, who was charged with second-degree manslaughter in Dante Wright's death, resigned within days of the shooting. Police have said Wright was pulled over for expired tags, but they sought to arrest him after discovering an outstanding warrant. The warrant for his failure to appear in court on charges he had fled from officers and had a gun without a permit during an encounter with Minneapolis police in June. Dozens of citizens spoke at Saturday's council meeting. In one tense moment, a man said he didn't agree with having unarmed people pull over drivers. He then turned to Wright and said, "Your son was killed, not because of a traffic stop in my mind, but because he had warrants." The man was drowned out by booze. The ACLU of Minnesota called the proposal an important first move in changing policing, but several police groups have raised concerns, saying parts of the resolution conflict with state law and will put public safety at risk. Coincidentally, no officers spoke at Saturday's meeting. Okay, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, Worth the Wait. The fact that Monster got a release at all is noteworthy. Since its 2018 debut on the festival circuit, actors Kelvin Harrison Jr. and John David Washington have gotten big career boosts, especially within the last year. It's interesting here to see their earlier efforts showing that even before the acclaim, Harrison's and Washington's respective talents were apparent. Told mostly via flashback, Monster tells the story of the downfall of a high school student, Steve, played by Harrison, who, along with two other kids, is arrested and put on trial for supposedly taking part in the brutal robbery and murder of a Harlem bodega owner. Steve, a talented, aspiring filmmaker, knows the importance of narration. He knows that what isn't included can be just as important as what is. This one is more complex than the classic wrongly accused trope, though. It turns out Steve is acquainted with the ringleader James, played to a T by rapper A$AP Rocky, and was indeed at the crime scene immediately prior to the incident. Still, how much or how little he knows remains a mystery until the final moments. At times, Monster has the feel of a long TV crime drama episode, but the acting saves it from that. In particular, the supporting work by Jeffrey Wright and Jennifer Hudson, who plays Steve's shocked middle-class parent, Jennifer Ely, who shines as Steve's court-appointed attorney, and Tim Blake Nelson as Steve's film teacher, all deserve special credit. Ultimately, though, it's Harrison who carries the film past occasional lapses in the script. Monster is worth the watch, if only to see the acting. But it's one guaranteed to stay with you, especially in an era when the topics of policing, prosecution, and criminal justice reform are front and center. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. The melodious sounds of trills and tweets, whistles and warbles are a harbinger of spring. But do you ever wonder what birds are actually talking about? Maybe they're catching up after a winter away. Or maybe they're saying, "Step off, this twig is my territory." Or maybe they're signaling that there's a predator about, even when there isn't. Well, if a bird crying wolf sounds silly, a new study shows that in Australia, certain male songbirds use this trick to get females they wish to woo to stick around a little longer. The results appear in the journal Current Biology. The superb lyrebird, that's spelled L-Y-R-E, is famous for its ability to imitate the calls it hears in its local environment, from the fluid melody of a shrike thrush to the distinctive laugh of a kookaburra. The males weave these oral entertainments into songs they sing to attract mates.
What lyrebirds are most well known for in Australia, what we call their recital song, their amazing lyrical loud song that they sing from the tops of the trees before dawn, throughout the day and even into dusk during the breeding season. And this recital song, also most of it is mimicry, and the male just reels through imitations of lots of species of forest birds, and they just cycle through them. Each new imitation is different from the rest.
Anastasia DL, a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Wollongong. She and her colleagues were planning on studying this impressive acoustical exhibition.
But we soon realised that every now and then, the male lyrebird was producing a completely different kind of mimicry.
This alternate routine is trotted out at the very end of the male's elaborate song and dance display. It's sort of buzzy and even somewhat annoying, and it perfectly reproduces the alarm calls made by a mobbing flock of birds that has spotted a predator.
They're visually conspicuous, they're acoustically conspicuous, and they're a reliable cue of the presence of a predator in the environment.
Even for humans.
I use them, mobbing flocks, to try and avoid stepping on snakes while I'm doing my fieldwork in Australia.
And a single male lyrebird can reproduce the whole shebang.
It's really impressive. The males even manage to imitate the sounds of small birds, the wing beats of small birds as they fly over or at the predator. It's very, very convincing.
And what do they hope to achieve with this performance? The clue, DL says, came from determining when they choose to do it.
So we found that males didn't produce this mobbing flock mimicry when a real predator was around. Not at all. The only context in which they produced it, the mobbing flock mimicry, was during courtship and particularly at key moments.
The first is when the male has sung his little heart out, entertaining a female with his elaborate and lyrical ballad, but his potential paramour turns up her nose.
And it's the moment she steps off his display platform is when the male switches to his mobbing flock mimicry.
A sound that suggests there's a predator nearby, when really, there isn't.
So we think this might be a way of the male saying, "Baby, it's dangerous outside, stay here safe with me," and then giving him more opportunity to display his beautiful song and dance prowess.
Well, the only other time DL and her colleagues witnessed males pulling this stunt was when they were in the midst of mating.
So the whole thing was absolutely bizarre.
Strange, it's true, but the researchers speculate that amorous males might give their partners the impression that they're surrounded by peril.
In order to prevent the females from prematurely ending the sexual interaction. Prematurely, that is, from the point of view of the male.
Because if the male doesn't deliver what he promised, the female might decide to take an early flight. For Scientific Americans, 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Here are some facts about the most dangerous place to be during a pandemic. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. The United States has the largest immigrant detention system in the world, with tens of thousands of people locked up in some 200 facilities across the country. People locked up by ICE have committed no crime. They're not serving time, but rather being held civilly as they await a hearing in immigration court that will decide whether they may remain in the country. ICE jails and prisons generally are run by private prison companies, where the motivating principle is profits. And those private prison companies have done a terrible job during the pandemic when it comes to testing social distancing, mask-wearing, staff protocols, and medical treatment. ICE's position is that they've taken extensive steps to safeguard detainees, staff, and contractors, a position not easy to reconcile with other facts reported by the New York Times. Prisons have been notorious for their failure to contain and prevent COVID-19, and the infection rate for COVID-19 in these company-run ICE prisons has been 5 times greater than the infection rate for other jails and prisons, which makes the infection rate for these ICE facilities 20 times greater than the infection rate for the general population, which puts the communities inside and outside the walls at risk, unnecessarily and inhumanely. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
Not only are the rich different from you and me, they're getting more different than ever. I'm not referring to mere millionaires, but to the billionaire bunch. In the past year, while ordinary Americans have lost jobs, businesses, and homes due to the pandemic economic crash, America's 664 billionaires have found themselves nearly 40% richer than before COVID. These fortunate few collectively added more than $1 trillion in 2020 to their personal stashes of wealth. And practically all of them got so much richer by doing nothing. Their money made the extra money for them because corporate stock prices zoomed even as regular people lost income. Take a peek at the richest of these different ones, Jeff Bezos, the alpha geek of Amazon. He hauled in an additional $75 billion last year, roughly $37 million an hour. You could do a lot of good with such riches, or you could splurge on yourself. Jeff splurged. He bought one of the largest sailing vessels ever built. More than 1 1/3 football fields long, the super yacht cost the diminutive mega-billionaire some $500 million. Plus, he'll pay some $60 million each year for operating expenses. Also, he had to buy a support yacht to sail along with his main boat. Why? Because the 3 sails on his 400-footer are so huge that a helicopter can't land on the deck, requiring an auxiliary yacht to provide a helipad. See, the rich really are different. Where to park our helicopter while at sea is a problem you and I don't have to face. This is Jim Hightower saying, according to mega yacht sellers, the main draw of these ostentatious purchases is that they reinforce inequality, literally letting the rich float in leisure and luxury oceans apart from even having to see hoi polloi like us.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1933. That was the day President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the Tennessee Valley Authority Act. The act created the TVA as a federal corporation and was tasked to address the resource development of the region, one of the poorest in the nation. These included flood control and improved travel along the Tennessee River. It also meant improved forestry to address soil erosion and facilitation of agricultural production. Control of water resources required a series of dams designed to navigate the river and reduce flooding. Though Wilson Dam had been completed before the establishment of the TVA, the authority had embarked on the construction of 16 more dams. During the Depression, the TVA hired tens of thousands of workers for conservation, construction, and development. Historian Eric Loomis notes that though the TVA was one of the region's largest employers of black workers, the authority also maintained rigid lines of segregation in its workforce. He adds that though 14 AFL unions eventually worked on dam construction, the agency initially refused to recognize unions. Workers would have to wait until 1940 to sign first contracts in the anti-union South. Today, the authority is most well known for its supply of electricity to nearby communities. It is the nation's largest public power company and serves about 80,000 square miles in the southeastern United States. TVA capacity to generate electric power includes some 29 hydroelectric dams, 11 coal-fired power plants, 3 nuclear plants, and several combustion turbine installations. It also has several solar and wind installations. The authority produces more than 130 billion kilowatt hours of electricity each year. The TVA played a critical role in transforming the South by constructing infrastructure necessary for modernization and industrialization.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 56 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting temperatures much cooler than yesterday, only about a high of around 70 to 72. We were in the mid-80s yesterday. A cold front is coming in and will be dropping some precipitation east of us, unfortunately. It'd be nice if it dropped here. But partly cloudy throughout the day with winds out of the northwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour. Considerable clouds this evening and then decreasing overnight late with lows near the low 40s. And winds will have decreased out of the northwest to 5 to 10 miles per hour. And then intervals of clouds tomorrow with sunshine, high only 61 degrees. Winds out of the north-northwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon, where we are supposed to be taking off our masks because we don't want to be fearful, have now spiked to 10,959 cases, and the deceased have increased to 141 from 139. Grass pollen is rated very high right outside the window in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is good at 31 parts per million, though that daytime UV index is very high at 8. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.18 inches. Visibility is at 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 80%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 60 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 59 degrees with showers in the vicinity. Rome is 71 and sunny. Kyiv is 63 and fair. Kabul is 70 degrees and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 82 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 63 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 56 and clear. San Francisco, California is 52 and partly cloudy with a dense fog advisory on the bay. And New York is 75 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. His first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is Out of the AP by Elaine Ganley and Frank Bajak. Cybercriminals have hit 4 Asian subsidiaries of the Paris-based insurance company AXA with a ransomware attack impacting operations in Thailand, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. The criminals claim to have stolen 3 terabytes of data, including medical records and communications with doctors and hospitals. In Ireland, meanwhile, the national healthcare system struggled to restore IT systems that were all but paralyzed in a cyber attack last week by a different Russian-speaking ransomware group. That group is demanding $20 million, according to the ransom negotiation page on its darknet site, and the AP had viewed that. The gang threatened yesterday, Monday, to start publishing and selling your private information very soon. The Irish government's decision not to pay the criminals means hospitals won't have access to patient records and must resort mostly to handwritten notes, like paper ballots. They can't hack those until painstaking efforts are complete to restore thousands of computer servers from backups. AXA Partners, the Paris insurer's international arm, offered few details of the Asia attacks. It said in a brief statement that their full impact was being investigated and that steps would be taken to notify and support all corporate clients and individuals impacted. It said the attack was recent, but did not specify when exactly. It said data in Thailand was accessed and that regulators and business partners have been informed.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Even more staff at the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Mexico's president presented an apology yesterday, Monday, for a 1911 massacre in which over 300 Chinese people were slaughtered by revolutionary troops in the northern city of Torreon. The apology is the latest in a series of ceremonies in which President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has sought to make amends for the mistreatment of indigenous and minority people in Mexico in past centuries. López Obrador said the point of the apology was to ensure that this never, ever happens again, he said, noting that during the period, Chinese were mutilated or hung from telegraph poles. The discrimination was based on the most vile and offensive stereotypes. These stupid ideas were transferred to Mexico, where extermination was added to exclusion and mistreatment. Many Chinese laborers had migrated to Mexico in the 1800s, in some cases to work on the expansion of the nation's rail network, but many set up businesses, farms, and in Torreon, even a bank. The 1911 killings of 303 Chinese men, women, and children occurred during the chaotic period of the Mexican Revolution, when revolutionary troops overran Torreon, sealing the fate of longtime ruler Porfirio Diaz. The loss of the city led Diaz to resign and leave for exile. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we'll meet up tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver.